My cinnamon pie recipe is going to be the best. It's going to have a ton of cinnamon flavor and a great texture. I think this is going to turn out kind of like a cinnamon pie that was featured on a TV show called Psych. So if you've seen that show and it looked good, you're definitely going to want to make this recipe. This cinnamon pie recipe is really easy because it only has a few ingredients. Here I have one 8-ounce block of cream cheese. I know you're probably thinking, Chef Parnell, why are we adding cream cheese to a cinnamon pie? I'll explain later. 2 large eggs, half a cup of evaporated milk, or 120 grams. And I wanted to point out that the cream cheese, the evaporated milk, and the eggs are room temperature. I put the cream cheese into the microwave for increments of 10 seconds for about 40 seconds, and I think 20 to 30 seconds for the evaporated milk. 3/4 of a cup of white sugar, or as I measure, 160 grams. I think you could go down to 2/3 of a cup and up to 1 cup, but I think 3/4 of a cup is perfect. You can't have a cinnamon pie without cinnamon, so I'm going to add between 1 and 2 tablespoons of ground cinnamon. Similar recipes online call for 3, sometimes even 4 tablespoons of cinnamon, which I think is a bit much. This is actually my 3rd time making this recipe. I'll explain later in the video, but I would recommend for you at home adding between 1 and 2 tablespoons of cinnamon, probably between 1.5 and 2. To finish off the recipe, I'm going to add 1 teaspoon of vanilla, 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt, and of course I have a 9-inch unbaked pie shell off to the side. You can use a store-bought crust, but I am using homemade as always. This recipe is super easy because all we have to do is mix together the ingredients and then pour them into the pie shell. So I am going to start by adding in the sugar, the cinnamon, the vanilla, and the salt. And I'm actually going to start beating this together. Put that off to the side. Now I'm going to add the milk. I'm going to add it a little bit at a time just to see how it works out. That looks good. This cord is getting tangled up. See, nice and smooth. I'm going to keep doing this, probably adding, I would say, 1 to 2 tablespoons at a time until all of the evaporated milk is incorporated into the filling. I just finished mixing in all of the evaporated milk into the filling. I tasted it and it tastes really good, but honestly, I think I'm going to need to add the eggs to really get a feeling for how it's going to taste once it's done. I know a lot of people don't like the idea of tasting batter with raw eggs, but honestly, eggs can really change the flavor of something like this. So I think it's gonna be necessary. I'm going to add the eggs one at a time and then taste it, and I will bring you back. At the beginning of this video, I added 1 tablespoon of ground cinnamon. Even though I know I'm going to add more, I want to show you what I think you should do at home. Start off with less and then add more. So now I'm going to add more cinnamon a little at a time, tasting as I go along. I think this is good. I think any more than 2 tablespoons of cinnamon in this recipe is going to be too much. not necessarily because of the cinnamon flavor, but because cinnamon doesn't like to incorporate into liquids. It's very fibrous, it's the bark of a tree. So honestly, I think past this point, it would start to get a little too fibrous-y, if that's a word. I had to beat this for a little while because at first I tasted it and I thought, oh, that's kind of like, it just felt like the cinnamon wasn't dissolving totally. I think that's going to be good. It's starting to have that spicy bit of cinnamon in the background as an aftertaste. And I think if you like cinnamon, this is the point, 2 tablespoons. But more than this, it's not so much the cinnamon flavor that's going to be a problem. It's that the cinnamon is going to be very fibrous-y, for lack of a better way of explaining it. So if you never made this before, I think you could do 1 tablespoon minimum, 2 tablespoon maximum, maybe 1.5 is about maybe what you would want to do. All I have to do is pour this into my unbaked pie shell. My oven is preheating to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, and I'm going to bake this uncovered for, I'm thinking, 45 minutes. I just pulled my cinnamon pie out of the oven. It was in at 350 Fahrenheit uncovered for 45 minutes. In terms of physical appearance, I was really pleased with how my cinnamon pie turned out. The crust was golden brown, and it was definitely the color you would imagine a cinnamon pie being. This cinnamon pie turned out great. This pie definitely tasted like cinnamon, each bite giving me that spicy aftertaste that you get from chewing cinnamon flavored gum. It was just a bit of a kick, not too much, so if you don't like spicy things, don't worry. I also like the soft, creamy texture of the custard filling. It definitely reminded me of pumpkin pie. Speaking of pumpkin pie, that's what this cinnamon pie made me think of. In fact, I think a good way to describe this pie would be a pumpkin pie without the pumpkin, but with a lot of spice. That's not necessarily a bad thing. If you like pumpkin pie, I think you'll really like this cinnamon pie. Although I do think that this recipe is easy to make, there are a couple things I wanted to go over. Like I said earlier in the video, this was actually my 3rd time making this pie. When I first started researching this pie, I was really surprised to see that basically every recipe had cream cheese. I didn't really understand why that would be necessary, so I was thinking maybe I could use my egg custard pie recipe as a base and just add cinnamon to it. Even though it was good, what I didn't anticipate is that pretty much all of the cinnamon in the egg custard pie version floated to the top. That's how I realized that the purpose of the cream cheese in this recipe is to thicken the filling so that the cinnamon doesn't rise to the top while it's baking. I did more research, so I decided to base my recipe on what people said they had seen on the TV show Psych. All of those versions called for either heavy cream or half and half. I like to keep things a little bit healthier, a little bit lower in calories, so I wanted to see if I could make an evaporated milk version. However, the second pie was a total failure. My evaporated milk was a lot colder than my cream cheese, so when I mixed the filling together, the cream cheese curdled. The texture was absolutely horrible, so unfortunately I had to throw it out. Although the first 2 didn't work out, I still think that this cinnamon pie recipe is really easy. The hardest part is probably getting the right amount of cinnamon. I definitely think that more than 2 tablespoons of cinnamon would add too much fiber to the filling, and I don't know how the texture would be. But like I have already said, if you're not sure how much to add, start with less, add more, and taste as you go. In fact, this is my first pie in my Thanksgiving pie series for 2021. I have a lot more pie recipes coming before Thanksgiving. They're easy to make and delicious, so make sure that you stay tuned. You aren't going to want to miss them. As always, thanks for watching. See you next time.